Welcome to my next free tutorial Friday. I'm a day late, but I'm going to try and make up for it with an interesting tutorial this week. I'm in Photo Booth on a Mac, and this is the photo manipulation um, tool that allows you to do all sorts of crazy effects. And typically, and of course nothing's showing up because it's just against a white piece of paper, but here as you can see, this sort of thing. And usually you do funny pictures of yourself, etc., but I like to use it as a design tool. And this is the technique that Neville Page and I came up with for the book Alien Race. And what we use it for most of the time is to create portraits, but you can create all sorts of things. And the filter we like to use is the mirror filter. So that's the one we're going to use this week. And what I'm going to do this week is just record capturing a bunch of starts for portraits. And then next week, the next free tutorial, I will paint over them. So what you do is I've set up a piece of illustration board back here. And so I have a nice white background. It doesn't matter if you have a background with some textures or something. You can just paint it out. But if you don't want to have to paint it out later, it's a nice way to go to just put a piece of white paper behind there. The other thing I've done is I have centered lighting. So if you see this block here, you'll see that the lighting is dead center on it, so coming down straight, so it's not side lighting. Otherwise I would have, where my finger's pointing here, I would have light coming from both sides, and it would be harder to do my paint over. So I've set it up with an overhead light source that's soft, so I have soft shadows. And then what you do, and these are just pieces of wood, is you just grab some interesting things, crumpled up pieces of paper, in this case pieces of old driftwood and things, and you just kind of move them around until you find something that you like. And it's going to be a little tricky because I like to, if you come at it from one side like this, you get a nice floating, object. Okay. If you come at it from the other side, and it's just a webcam that I'm using here, but if you do it on your laptop, use your camera. See, it doesn't connect, or it connects in the center, of course, but it doesn't look like it's a floating object. So if you come at it from the other side, though, then you can get these floating objects, which look more like characters or vehicles or robots, whatever you're trying to use it for, architecture, all sorts of things. And so you just manipulate this around and see if I can find, I don't know if this one's going to give me a good one or not. Not all the pieces that you throw up here work, but you sort of just use it. I don't like that one. So you just use this as an interactive design tool, and you just keep moving around your props, okay, whatever you're imaging here, until you find something that you like. And you can create all sorts of stuff. You can create character portraits, you can create pieces of armor, spaceships, robots, and you're just looking for interesting patterns, interesting shapes. This is a little bit tricky because I'm using my left hand and I'm a righty, so I'm having a little bit harder time moving it around to find something that I like easily. And maybe these pieces aren't great. Oh, there's kind of an interesting little guy right there. So what you do is, if you hold down, if you hit return, what's going to happen is that you're going to get this annoying 3 beeps and then a big white flash. And a lot of times that will ruin the lighting, especially if you're using a laptop. So what you want to do is hold down Option Shift return. Okay, so if you hold down Option Shift first and then you hit return, oh, there's kind of an interesting character down there in the center, and you hit return, it automatically takes a snapshot without the flash and without the annoying timer. Because a lot of times these things are very subtle in that you could lose the character very easily, okay, or and they're hard to hold, especially I'm holding in my left hand, starting to already get tired. There's but I see like an interesting face there, just dead center. And then I would paint out the silhouette. So just move it around, take a snapshot. So I'm holding down Option Shift and then hitting the return key. And then maybe I want this character's, younger brother. So just move it around a little bit. So once you find a character, And you just keep moving around these elements and then capturing the whole family. So this is old piece of driftwood. You know, vegetables work well. Just try anything. So, oh, there's kind of interesting. It's nice. Things that have dots on them, of course, make nice eyeballs. Things that have holes make for nice eye sockets if you're specifically trying to do characters. And if you have a stick like this, it also makes kind of a nice neck. And so I'm not having great success yet, but that's okay. It's pretty easy to do, and you know, you just keep moving things around and then hope for the best. And if you don't get anything that works, no big deal. Try something else. And I'm about to try something else because I don't love any of this. Let's try to create, let's see what I can get out of this guy. So this is just a piece of bark. Put the whole thing here so you can see it. It's just an old piece of bark that I found. And let's see what we get. So hold it like this. Yeah, some interesting patterns. Maybe it might need to be some nice, you know, costume elements that I could use. So, you know, keep in mind that the scale can be anything you want once you start painting it, right? See how those holes work for nice eye sockets? If I twist it like that, then we get a character. So there's a guy with his eye sockets and mouth, and if you just move it left and right, you can start to change the proportions of that head. And you can play with this now as an interactive design tool. And each time I find one that I like, and you can come a little bit closer and fill up the frame, it'll give you a little bit more resolution to work with when you paint over. So once you find one, you just take a bunch of snapshots like this. I could use a little bit more light in this scene. As you can see, if I tilt it, it's because I'm tilting it down, it's all dropping into shadow. If I tilt it up, we see a lot more texture. But you can see how it would be a pretty easy paint over, and what we'll do next week is paint over some of these and drop in some eyes into those sockets, clean up the silhouette, add a neck, add some costume elements, and then if you like the design, then you can pose it, warp it, make it a more interesting illustration. But when I'm looking for design, you know, interesting designs, I don't worry that it's symmetrical. In fact, next week when you see me paint over them, you'll see that I only paint one half to find the design. So this is kind of like doing the sci-fi suits inside Modo, but it's photographic in this case, as opposed to having to render those in a 3D program. Occasionally your hand shows up in there. It's no big deal. You can always just paint that out. Anything interesting over here? Again, maybe like a cool tribal kind of chest piece, costume piece. Let's try some pieces of paper and see what we get. So I like to do a lot of times crumpled up piece of paper, and you can get some really nice surfaces that, again, it's all the sort of abstraction used as our start, right, to help us see things that we might not normally see, or we might not normally draw. And so, you know, I'm experimenting with this and seeing if there's anything there that I like. No success yet, but it's very, very subtle. So what you want to do is not, you know, rush into it. And I like to be very selective and not just snap, 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 right, and then have to edit later. I like to just move this around until I find something that I like. A lot of times if you're thinking about a certain usage, of course, it's going to make more sense, like a piece of costume, or, you know, a piece of armor, or a spaceship, a piece of architecture, or a helmet or something. So if you have an idea before you start this, then it helps you to look for shapes that are working. I don't really have an idea. It's just my example, but I don't really like that piece of paper. Let's try another one. Okay, when I take a piece of paper, let's just take, like, this is a flat piece of paper, okay, with a texture on it. So it's a cool piece of paper that already has like almost skin texture or bark. And then I like to crumple it up, all right, into kind of a round shape. And if you were trying to make a character, and basically a character is kind of like a lumpy ball, okay? And if you start with something that's kind of like a lumpy ball, and you come in from one side and mirror it, then you start to get things that look much more like a big lumpy ball, which starts to work better for a character. Okay, and so you just move that around, see if there's anything that you like. Maybe this big triangular head, this kind of cool looking. Could be fun to paint over that. Or maybe it's better for armor. So maybe if I want to make it armor, I'll make it sort of a torso shape, and then I'll pull out kind of an arm. So I have this, maybe this shoulder piece, doing something like that. So you kind of rough it out a little bit in the right shape. And say, okay, I'm looking for an element here for a chest piece. And that can start to work. And you can see maybe there's actually, it's maybe like an interesting robe. And it's just the top part, but kind of starts to have interesting shapes. So snap a couple of those. And sometimes you hit it and it's like every direction you twist your piece of paper or your, whatever your prop is, you get something great. And other times you get nothing. So I'm getting a little bit of nothing on this episode, but we got a couple of characters showing up, and I think you're getting the idea, which is really what this is about, is to sort of introduce you to the concept of using Photo Booth as an interactive design tool. It's kind of interesting. I don't know what that is, but it's kind of interesting. So anyway, when we did the book Alien Race, we used this technique a lot and created lots and lots of aliens very, very quickly that had a huge range of diverse shapes and forms, just because the prop that we used was different each time. We went from vegetables to seashells to pieces of tinfoil. Let's say we're going to do a piece of armor. Here's a piece of, let's say this is I have a gold piece of paper here. Let's see if I just manipulate that around, if I can get some interesting shapes. And can I get, and of course this is going to, the nice thing about doing this as well is you get all this reflectivity, you get all the color shifting, you get all the subsurface scattering if it's like a piece of fruit or something. And maybe that can be a nice little reflective element that we could use. Later, next week, we'll put all these things together into something interesting. And this is white on the back side. That's kind of interesting. Maybe that's part of a piece of jewelry. So I like to just build these databases, and I don't really have an idea of what they're going to be a lot of times. I'm just looking for interesting shapes, and then when you look back at them again, you can create all sorts of things from them. That guy's kind of interesting. Again, I'll know when we start painting a bit. So you just keep searching. And so I'll sit and maybe, do this for an hour and end up with 60 of these things. And then go back and paint the ones I like. So maybe like an interesting helmet there or something. Looks like my webcam's having a little bit of trouble with focus. I'd like it to get that center part in focus a bit, but there's maybe an interesting helmet there. All right, let's try a different piece of paper. So it's got a bit more of a dull finish to it. Crumple it up. So I've got this ball. And let's see, there we go. Focus is looking a bit better now. and move it around and see what we can find. Nothing great. Oh, wait. Interesting. Cool looking helmet maybe. And you can see always multiple things in each photograph. Or when we paint over it multiple times even, you can get a different result each time you paint it. Oh, there's kind of a cool, that's kind of a cool character. Let's go back and see if I can get him. And you see how subtle it is. So you have to move these things very slowly, especially the smaller the item you're using, the more sensitive it will become to movements. So, and the closer you get to the camera, of course, the harder it is to hold it still. And now maybe, oh, a lot of times you see them and and they go away and it's hard to ever get them back. So let's see if I'm going to get any more out of this. That could be a cool interior space, actually. So I think you can always vary the scale, so maybe that's some sort of cool interior room. I'll take a snapshot of that for later. And there's also a cool filter for this that might make it look more interesting. And it is the squeeze filter. And I like to turn it all the way up. Okay, and I like to make 1-point perspectives out of this. So if I try to create that room again, now you can see the depth that's created because it's squeezing the center of the image and distorting it to a single point. And so if you think about this in Photoshop, all you'd have to do is add atmosphere to give this thing more depth. So if I was trying to create that interior space, I'll just open up this a bit and see if I can create an interesting sort of floor here by flattening that plane. So I just made kind of a flat area of that paper. Now I'm trying to line it up with my camera. And it's a bit tricky to get it lined up, and it likes to distort a lot in the center there. And you just paint the foreground floor later. Not really working. Let's look for some nice mountains and canyons here. Okay, I just made sort of a valley kind of shape in my paper. I'm going to hold it up here to the camera, and I'm going to see if I can get some interesting canyons and rock formations. Obviously they're a bit shiny, but you can see how it's in perspective because of the distortion that's happening by squeezing it down to a single point. And so I think these are kind of fun ways to go, almost exploring different environments by using this squeeze filter. The black is a bit too dark on camera there. Alright, I'm going to go back to the mirror filter, give it one more shot, and then that's going to be it for this week. And oh, that's kind of interesting. Nice canyon to a cliff, maybe a tall mountain there at the end. So kind of here we're along a cliffside. It's kind of look like rocks. And then there's a big mountain sticking up there at the end. So you can sort of just move that around and play with that, and you can start to see that. And then I would paint out the right-hand side. That's all white. I would just replace that. And you could even replace it with some photographic background of sky and mountains. Right. So interesting rock formations now. And I can imagine this is a cool motion blurred background where all I have to do is paint a little flying spaceship that's flying towards the center of this image, and out around the perimeter it's all motion blurred because of the distortion. But in our painting it'll be because, right, we're flying towards the center. So this one's starting to get interesting. So just when I was about ready to switch, I hit on one little angle that started giving me more interesting results. So here now we're in a canyon, flying towards, now we're in between cliff walls. Oh yeah, that works. That's pretty nice. And you can easily imagine it wouldn't take much, right, to paint that out and add atmosphere. And that's the stuff we'll do next week. So let me try one more prop. Let's try this guy, piece of wood, and see if I'm going to get anything. Whoops! I'm going to switch it over to back to mirror. Not fish. I don't want fish. I want mirror. There we go. Let's see. I didn't get any great characters. We had one guy show up there briefly, but didn't really have a lot of successes today. That's probably the Murphy's Law of demos, right? Goes fine when nobody's watching, and then when you fire up the machine and try to record it, you aren't successful. So, but I'll show you a database. I have thousands of these that are actually quite successful. But I wanted you to see the idea and have fun with it and try to experiment yourself. Let's try this one. It was kind of a knobby old piece of seaweed, dried seaweed. And sort of big orbs there. It could be some sort of bug-eyed creature. And not really seeing them yet. Spin it around, try a different angle. Maybe I'll add, if I can find a better prop for next week. Before I start painting, I'll show a couple more. Anyway, let's call it done for the recording part of the characters and props. And then let me jump in. I'll show you a little bit of my database. And then next week, I'll paint something. So here's a little look at my database of these alien portraits. So these are all the organic photo booth images I've done over the years. And originally, like I said, it started for the book Alien Race, and then I think I talked about this briefly in that inspiration and workflow techniques tutorial or video that's on my channel as well. But anyway, this is a look at folders and folders of them. So in this folder, there's 133 of them. And you can see they're all sorts of different shapes and sizes and different materials. And again, some might work for costume bits, some might be funny characters, some might be sad, and some might just be, you know, odd and strange. But you can see how many of them work, that guy's very sad, work very well as starts. So it's a way of sort of, you know, it's using photography interactively through Photo Booth, and you are using it as a design tool. So you're kind of interactively sketching in a way. I like to think of these as sketches, and creating these things that you can then paint over. Here's and you can start to classify them based on their characters. So here I have them as zombies, and so this was I think it's a great looking zombie start. And there's, you know, eyes, nose, some sort of mouth. Here's another one. And it was actually, this was a bird's nest in a wooden bowl. So who knows, you know, what you're going to end up with. But it's fun, just give it a try. And there's a starfish, an old dried starfish. So these guys had a little bit of that look. And this was done a long time ago, actually, with my old MacBook Air. So the resolution's quite low. You can see it's 480 by 640. And now you can get much higher resolution on a new laptop, or using, like I did, the Logitech webcam. And so you have, you know, a much higher resolution image to paint over, because if you get a good one, you know, you can be pretty close to, you know, having a lot done from the beginning. add the neck and body to this, and then there's eye sockets ready and some sort of mouth nose thing set up. And I think it just gives you great range. This is like a gourd, right? Like a vegetable gourd, and just trying to find characters. So that you can see the range and the color and the materials, textures, and yeah, it's just sort of, it's endless basically. So that's anyway a look at my database of how many of those are. I don't know how many are in this folder. There's thousands. And next week I'll pick out some of these and paint up the ones. Here's actually the ones we just did today. Let me see if I can get this photo booth to fit on this screen. There we go. So those are the ones we just captured in this tutorial. And if you just take a quick look to get started, yeah, this one looks actually very humanoid. We could work that, and we could actually pull some of this. Maybe that's the costume, and pull that one over here and stick it on top as the costume, or even that. Or this is kind of now a cool looking chest piece. Add a couple of these little elements for jewelry bits or clasps. Maybe this goes right here on dead center, and that's what holds it all together. And then we grab this guy and start painting over that as the head. And maybe we put a golden helmet on him. Maybe that's his helmet. So, or this one looks kind of interesting. So there's, you can see that's what we got out of our session. And you can just keep doing them, and it's fun because it's very, very easy to do and gets your brain seeing new shapes, new patterns, new proportions, and I think it can inform your styling range, which is always a good thing. So hope you found it interesting, and tune back in next week when I will paint up one of these or several. Hey all, welcome to this week's Free Tutorial Friday. This is a continuation of last week's free tutorial, which was about using Photo Booth as a design tool. And I pulled up one of the images from last week, and the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to make an action, actually a couple of actions, and you'll see that this is actually quite low res. It's like 768K or something, and the first thing I want to do is up-res it a bit so we have a little bit more resolution to work with. So I've just quadrupled it there, and when you do that, it's going to get a little softer. So there's a couple filters that I like to use. And you'll notice I made an action first, and I'm recording all these steps. Not as my video, but actually recording as an action. And the first thing I'm going to do is go in, and I like to soften it sometimes. So I like to play with median, so it's under noise. And what you can do is you can get a nice softer underpainting, capturing just the larger elements if you like. So here I've just softened it a bit. And then sometimes you're going to lose some of the edges and details, and you can go back and resharpen it. So it's like a two filter step that smooths it out a bit and also then resharpens it. So I'm saving that as an action. So I've quadrupled the size, and I have recorded an action that makes it larger, runs a median pass, and then runs a sharpen on it. And that's like the first thing I would do when I open any of these. And then I would put my action palette into button mode, and I could just hit button mode anytime I want to do it. So here I'll do it to this image. So that's been up-resed, filtered, and it's good to go should I want to use that, like for his helmet, for instance. So that's the first step. And I'm doing this first part of the tutorial in real time, so hopefully you can follow these steps of making actions a little bit more accurately. And what I've done here is I want to now make an action that will copy this, basically copy it and flip it to the other side. So I made a new layer on top, and I painted on one side of the portrait, and this is going to be my copy flip. And now what I'm going to do is record the steps. So I made an action, I have a center line, and what I want to do first is delete everything on the left. And it can be the left or the right, okay, depending what side you like to paint on. And then I'm going to copy and paste what I have on the right into a new layer, which I've just done. Then I'm going to go to transform and flip horizontal, grab the move tool, and I'm going to slide it over, and it's going to snap on center. And the reason I put that little smudge in the upper right there was that anchors it, so when I had it set to snap, it'll snap to the upper corner, and that makes my center line perfect. And I'll put it back in button mode, and now let's give it a try. So new layer, and grab a brush, and I'll paint with a different color. So I always want to test it first, see if it's going to work. And here we go. So just scrub around a bit, put a little swatch up in the corner, and you can always clean that up at the very end and then just hit flip copy. So there it works. And that's going to be the way that I'm going to use that tool and that button over and over. So let's start painting this now that I have my two actions set up. I'm really just going to use that copy and flip one all the time. So the first thing I like to do when working with these alien portraits is to block in the neck and shoulders. And this also gives you an idea of scale. And what I'm looking for is the design. I'm not worried about making a nice illustration at this point. So I'm going to stay with full symmetry. Here I grab my little edging brush that I showed from a previous tutorial that has a little gradation built into it. So it has a hard edge on the right when I downstroke, and then has a gradation working inward. And so that works nicely to reflect the background of this light gray into that round eyeball. So I'm just going to do a black eyeball here, and I'm going to reflect the light source. And I have centered light, centered soft lighting from like a big soft spot up above his center of his head. And this is usually the very first step to see if I like this design that we got out of Photo Booth or not. Then I hit my button there again, so flip copy. And you see immediately it comes to life a bit. And you can make some decisions. And I just made a color dodge layer there, like I have done in previous tutorials, where I double click on it and turned off those two little boxes to allow it to blend with the pixels underneath. And so this is one of the very first things to do, is find the bigger forms and give it a little bit more dimension by introducing more value change. So a lot of times when you shoot these things out of Photo Booth, they might be too flat, or you see other shapes in there that are not the forms that you want to render. And so you can start to, and you can go as extreme as you like, right? Basically effectively turning on the light, making it brighter and brighter and more harsh. Or you can keep it very, soft. In this case, I really want to sort of exaggerate some of the forms. So I'm going to do the same thing. I did a flip copy. And when I did that, it makes it a normal layer, so I have to go back and unclick those boxes to turn it into a color dodge layer that's going to mix. And when I merge them, you see it goes back, and there's the example of turning off those boxes, how that mixes more nicely with the pixels underneath. So it allows you kind of to have light on a separate layer, which is nice. And now is basically noodle time. So I've got my basic forms, I've got the character there, I've established, where are the eyes, the mouth. I don't really know where the nose is going to be. And now I start to work in some more anatomy and put in eyelids, work out the wrinkles, and see if I can be efficient in using this Photoshop process. The whole idea is to not paint over the whole thing again. Kind of defeats the purpose. So you have to show some restraint and try to go in and work with what you saw in the original that you liked, and tweak it and sort of keep finessing and pulling the character out of that original source of inspiration that you photographed. So this is the sort of classic, start with photo collage or photo reference. In this case, something that we created with a piece of bark in Photo Booth, and then just start painting over the top. And you'll see it's a different process than drawing, obviously. But when you start painting over the top, effectively you are drawing. And I'm just going to add a little reflective, like he's got some moisture in his eye. Maybe he does look a little sad anyway, so he's got a little tear there. And just keep painting over, and you see it's on a separate layer at the top, set to normal. And you just start working out the forms and glazing over it. And so you see I'm working with this is just a basic round brush with a little texture set to it. It has a little texture so that it kind of keeps the texture of the original photograph a bit. And I have it set to 40% opacity. So I'm just sort of glazing over and looking for the shapes that I want to develop. So I like to look at patterns and things that look organic and look like wrinkles and see if I can play those up a bit. And for this painting phase of this demo, I've sped this up to double speed, which I think is still very easy to follow. These get very slow when you start to think a lot about design, and they're fun to paint anyway, so you can start to noodle them and get lost a bit. and so they tend to go. Speeding it up is fine because they can get kind of slow if you let it. If you set a timer and you try to say, okay, I'm just going to give myself 30 minutes, which I think this was actually less because I added some at the beginning, some at the end, were 22 minutes, I think, total running time. So this is maybe about 30 minutes total. So this is probably about a half hour painting. I think even including, probably not counting the action stuff at the beginning. Anyway, I digress. So back to the painting. And you can see you just go around and pull out the shapes you like and paint over the ones you don't. And so it's kind of a discovery of what's working in the original source and what do you need to get rid of. And in this case, this first pass, it's going to get roughed out, and then I'm going to find some problems, and then of course just paint over it. So, but it's kind of like drawing at this point, but you're doing it with value and color. And you see I'm only having to paint one half because I have my copy and flip, and I kept my symmetry. And I'll show a couple of examples from Alien Race, the book, some of the finished illustrations, some of the pages from that book, to show how you can take these a little bit further and tilt the head, twist the body, tilt the shoulders, that sort of thing. And then you could even relight it if you wanted to add a little gradation from left to right in the background, add a little rim lighting on one side, shift the hot spot over, move the highlight in the eyes. And you can do all those illustrative things at a later time. But when I'm looking for design, I'm not worried about the symmetry. I can imagine a nicer illustration with more time spent. What I'm doing here is adding a little bit of the surface when it rolls away. I'm letting it reflect the color and value of the background. So I have my little edging brush that I use for the eyeball. So I'm doing basically the same thing I did on the eye, but I'm doing it to the entire head. And that as that surface rolls away, it gets just a little reflective and starts to pick up the color and value of the background. Okay, so flip it. All right, so copy and mirror, and I just have to hit that one button in my action palette. And when I paused and I looked at this, I wasn't really happy with, I see like multiple mouths in there, too many like horizontal lines through the center of his head above his mouth. And so in this pass, I'm going to go back and refine some of those things. So these get to be a little bit, I think they're still kind of fun to watch, but it's a little bit like watching, grass grow at a certain point, because you can spend a lot of time on design. And I'm not, a mainstream character person that does this all the time. I haven't painted a character like this in probably 6 months, maybe 7 months now. So maybe even more. So I'm a little rusty, but it's still fun to do. And you sort of can't be wrong with an alien. It's tough to be wrong with an alien because you can make up all sorts of stuff and reasons why. Plus, we don't know what they look like anyway. So always the most fun to paint these. So you can see I just color pick, and you'll see there's very little color picking from my Photoshop color picker because all the colors and values were already in my image from the photo booth exercise. And that's what's really fun about it. You get all this color, all this texture, and you end up with nice color palettes, and you can just color pick from within, and you have a full value range. It already looks three-dimensional. So all we have to do is finesse it. And, in a lot of ways, finesse it in simplifying it, actually. It's going to be a little too textural, too photographic, usually too visually complex. And so most of your time is spent going back and painting over things and simplifying. So, typically in doing a drawing first, then a Photoshop rendering, you layer this kind of, you might do a line drawing, you'd scan it, maybe you do a grayscale thing in Photoshop, all painting from scratch. Then you would go and grab a photograph of a piece of bark, for instance, and you would layer it back on top of the image that you had painted, which completely works. And it's a very, very common way to work. But this is a little bit the opposite, where you start with something that's photographic and already has the overall feeling of the design that you like, and then you paint over the top, simplifying it the other way. So you already have all your texture, your color, and you already have the basic form of where you saw the eyes going, where you saw the mouth. And you can always come back in and adjust things. Here I'm going to adjust the silhouette a little bit. He's got some big crunchy ears there. And just work around the outside. Add a little bit more of the background, right, reflecting into the sides of his head. It's all very, very loose at this point. But you know, it's enough to evaluate the design, and especially in just 30 minutes. And you can do them even faster. You saw in the first like 4 minutes or so, just by dropping in the eyes and the neck and shoulders, we already had a character that we could say, yes or no, I want to spend more time on this, or I don't. And that's really fun to be able to do that at, you know, sort of with photographic colors and textures, and at such a fast pace. So that's what one of the reasons I really like this technique. The other reason I really like the technique, which I learned in doing a lot of the characters for Alien Race, was the fact that I could create infinite range of style by grabbing different source material to use in that photo booth technique, which we talked about that a little bit in the last video. It's a great way to sort of extend your aesthetic range as a designer, because you get a lot of, we've talked about this a lot, of muscle memory and that sort of thing, and you get in a rut. You draw the same shapes over and over again. And so this is a fantastic way to start with different shapes and apply foundation you know, techniques of showing form. And in this case, we're not really doing much in the way of perspective. We just have a little bit of it. Occlusion as this thing, you know, wraps, and foreshortening as the textures wrap around the head. But really, it's just about applying the foundation principles of showing form with value. And by doing that, right, you can apply that to all sorts of different sources. So I'm just going to extend that little bark texture there as it wraps around the back of his head. It's weird. It's got like kind of like a bald spot. He's got like this bald dome on top of his head here. Put a little notch there so it looks like that bark wraps around. Maybe that's his version of hair. So it's I find it really powerful if you spend enough time on your foundation skills, and you know, meaning the basics of light and shadow and how to show form. You can start with anything. The subject matter doesn't make a difference. It could be a car, a spaceship, a building, a landscape. There's the copy and flip again, and merge those back together into one layer. And you can really extend the range of your style by starting with different things. Okay, so I added a little multiply layer on top. This is another thing I like to do in order to pull out the forms without having to repaint any of the textures. And so it's just a multiply layer floating on top. I have a big soft airbrush, and I'm going in to sort of emphasize the forms a bit more. So all I'm trying to do is increase the value change, and by increasing the value change, our brains see more form change. So I'm trying to push some of that sides of the head back into shadow a bit, and trying to accentuate that nose that's kind of starting to show up there on the front of his face. Did a copy flip, and you see I didn't have anything in the corner there to anchor that one, so I've just copied, flipped, merged, and then put it back on multiply. And then I'm playing with the opacity. You can see I'm turning it on and off there, and that's just to see how dark do I want it to go or not. And it's nice to have that shadow layer on shadows on a separate layer. I'm going to do the same here by making another color dodge layer, and grab a soft airbrush, and I'm going to pull this all the way really bright just as an example. So basically big soft airbrush, color dodge layer floating on top, and this would be like if his skin was a little bit shiny, and in that case, in that highlight there, very shiny. Let's erase it a little, and you can see that each time I increase the value change across the surface, we see more form. And when we go beyond what our brain is accustomed to with a matte surface, like halfway to black, if you watch my other my educational DVDs, you know what I'm talking about. If you go beyond that, like I'm doing now with this color dodge layer, it's going to start to look reflective because it's going well beyond the halfway to black value range. So I'm going all basically from white to black using all the value range, and really the only time you see that happening a lot is on reflective surfaces. So just pulling up a couple little reflective highlights, and ultimately it's going to be too much. I'm going to copy and flip it again, and you'll see I need to set it back to color dodge, and then I'm going to readjust those, and then when I flatten them, of course, I lose it. Reset them. There it is. You see how it works differently just by changing those couple of boxes. And then you can turn it on and off, and you can play with the lighting. So I think it's going to wrap up our demo of this one, and I'm going to jump into a couple finish pages and talk a little bit about those, and then that's going to be it for this week. Okay, so I think that's going to wrap it up on the demo side, and now I'm just going to show you a couple of other ones that I painted for the book Alien Race. And these are pages from the book, and I just want to show you some that I spent a little more time doing design work because, as I mentioned before, you could spend a lot of time and it could just keep going and going. But here's the original source, like that, which was a bird's nest in a wooden bowl. And you can see there was the mouth, there were the eyes, and I even got this funky eyelid out of it that came out of that source image. And then I detailed up this with some other dropped-in photo bits and pieces, and then painted over the whole thing, and made a little fur brush and painted in all that fuzzy. It's like a fat rabbit, fat sci-fi rabbit with a helmet on. And here's a seashell. So you see that one, and then you can see there's the paint over. But you know, most of it was all there, and added again some other elements that we did in Photo Booth for the armor. And you see on this, I've reposed it and you know, given it a little bit more character. It didn't relight it much, but just twisted the head a bit and twisted the shoulders, gave it a little tilt. Here's another one. Here's the onion, and you can see that almost everything was there. I pretty much worked with what I had and saw that, you know, 2 eye sockets here, a mouth. I liked these stripes, and then I didn't know what this was going to be, but there were the ears, and you'll see over here pretty much stayed all the same. Right, obviously with some painting time, but the stripes, the color patterns, those became some weird earring things or weird earmuffs. I don't know what they are. Headphones of some sort. They're so kind of stuck into our secondary ear, and then here's the other ear over the top. And so that's just, you know, more time painting, but all the exact same steps that I just showed. And what's fun about this one is that this piece of armor, well, not armor, but it looks like leather. I think it looks like leather. This is a piece of bark, and this has been almost untouched. I just cleaned up a little bit through the center and this collar to get it to fit on here and fit her character, but all the rest of this, all those shapes and all of this came right out of that photo booth exercise. And one last one. I think this is a pretty nice example because so much of it was there in the seashell. And you can see the eyes, the nose. I picked this as the mouth, and then I even had this weird you know, neck piece. I saw that as a piece of armor, and so the paint over looked like that, and you can see where it came from. So if you spend a little bit more time, you can take this process much further, obviously, and have a lot of fun with it. So I hope you enjoyed this week, and tune in next week and see what I come up with. Have a great one. Bye-bye.